The Earth. Part 3. Religious and moral conditions in various non-Christian peoples, as of 1847. '74. Jews, Mohammedans, and Brahmins in spiritual perspective. 28th April 1847. Original content summary. The critics are people who live from scolding. The hay for the oxen and the donkey. The spiritual earth is guided by Christian spirits only. The present Jews. Strong comparison with the undermixing of mankind with Jews from the spiritual point of view. Their role in the spiritual realm, but misused. The great means they have available, but their abuse thereof. The Mohammedans, a variation of Jews and Aryan Christians. Their main virtue is trade and war. Their imagination of the hereafter, and their role there. The Brahmins, mysterious miracles, where black magic plays a role. The caste system, and tragic state of lower culture there. About critics. We shall, however, not consider all the inhabited regions of the earth properly, since this would require too much time and space. But we shall only sketch a general view of the so-called conditions, considering the various main inhabitants of the earth, which brings about the spiritual union between them and heaven. Since we have, so far, only paid attention to the Christians, and left the other inhabitants of the earth untouched, it would, in the course of time, appear to some reader, in this regard, in respect of the totality of the earth, to make a few biting remarks, which will not be lacking anyway. The so-called critics of profession must indeed criticize everything and sniff out and insult, for these are the people who live from scolding. And since the world is always reading and much more attentive to insults than praises, this evil quality of the world is a particularly powerful leverage for critics to complain about. Only the works and actions of people who do something are easy prey for the critics, who criticize them, to be labelled by all sorts of very sensitive means. For this, then, spew these insult-hungry worldly wise even more bile unto everything they do not fear to be beaten by. So it is necessary to give them as much as possible of a donkey muzzle, and sometimes through such a message some hay, so that these poor animals have something to eat. It would not be necessary to ask further in this message about the earth. Any explanation about what the other inhabitants, since the principal thing indeed always remain, the Christians, and the spiritual earth is governed and directed only by Christian spirits, and never by pagan. But this is only a few portion of hay for the critics, so that they can get something to eat. In the tropics, however, it is well known that the grasses are much stronger than in the temperate zones, where the Christian flag is already blowing. Therefore, we may also be assured that we shall find an abundance of all hay in the tropics, And so let us turn to the other inhabitants of the earth with this intention. In addition to the many Christian sects, the Jews live scattered all over the world. They resemble the bacon slices with which the cooks lard the lean venison. In this way, all kinds of people, who are mostly very lean game, are also larded with the Jews all over the world. Jews then mostly resemble pigs, which people everywhere let grow some fat, so that when they are lean, they can again be underpinned by the gold and silver fat of the Jews. A Jew, as he is now constituted, is completely a pig. Already the outer appearance certifies for everyone to which class of animal this human race belongs. A Jew currently generally looks like a pig, and stinks like a pig, and rolls everywhere in the most despicable world mud like a pig, in order to quench his thirst for gold and silver. He is spiritually taken, happy with any kind of food. He is a Christian for the Christian, a Turk for the Turk, a pagan for the pagan, a Chinese for the Chinese, and a fetish servant together with the fetish, only in order to be able to procure all their gold, silver, and precious stones. A pig can also enjoy any food. Even the barest dirt is not unwelcome to him, as long as it is warm. This is also the case with the Jew. Wherever he finds any warmth or inclination for his interest, he eats it. For these are just the people who are available for everything for money. And among them, there are very few exceptions. The best, as you say, are not worth a shot of gunpowder in spiritual terms. They are still waiting for a Messiah who would like to lead them back to their old promised land and make of them a great and powerful people. But this Messiah will never come, and they will remain what they are until the end of time. Therefore, they play an exceedingly low role in the spirit realm, which is easy to understand. They are there what they are here, namely hagglers, with the only difference that here they walk among the people in human form. But on the other side, they mostly appear in the form of pigs, which they hate most of all. Admittedly, not obvious to everyone, not even among themselves, but only seen from the pure light of truth. Since there is not much more to be done with the Jews, and everyone knows that they are to be found all over the world among all nations, and that they conduct the same business everywhere, we will say nothing more about them. It is true that in them the great spiritual qualities are still predominantly present, but these qualities are used for vain evil. Therefore, they remain what they are, and in the spirit world there is no leaner heaven than the Jewish one, for they also bargain there, and the shine of gold is more to them than the most intense light of truth. The Mohammedans. trade and war as the main characteristics of the Mohammedans. First, after the Jews, come the Mohammedans, who inhabit a small part of Europe, a fifth of Asia, and an eighth of Africa. These Mohammedans are a variant of the Jews and the Aryan Christians, but their main virtue is trade and war. What they cannot get by trade, they buy with weapons in their hands. Their time will soon be over. The highest reward of their commercial and martial efforts they put into sensual pleasures. Therefore, their Elysium, as they imagine it, bristles with the most beautiful young girls and women, with whom they hope to do their lewd business for eternity, without becoming weary and tired in their sensual feelings. Some of them imagine their Elysium in such a way that the ground is paved with the whitest and most beautiful women's breasts, on whom they can wander around so comfortably. And the women and the girls grow in increasingly sweeter in form, as the fungi from the earth, and they can make use of it as often as they wish, and exclaim in full delight, "How wonderful and great is our Allah!" Thus they imagine the trees in their Elysian gardens as beautiful female bodies, just as the Greeks and Romans had imagined a certain goddess Daphne after transforming Apollo into a laurel tree. These tree wives are full of genitals and are available to be used. This is approximately the idea of heaven of most of the Mohammedans, and of course have to be understood the most distinguished favourite foods and beverages. It is self-evident that with them very bad aspects awaits them in the spiritual world. So it would be a waste of paper and ink to give more attention to it. It is self-evident, however, that they are not to be condemned because they are this way, and in the spiritual world it will be taken care of in the spirit world to guide them unto the right path. Only as long as they remain Mohammedans, there is no provision for them in the spirit realm. What should they do? What they believed cannot be allowed. Therefore, they are over there like wanderers, not knowing where to turn to. The Brahmins, Brahmanas, the caste system, magic of the Brahmins, their beyond. In addition to the Mohammedans, there are the Brahmins, who live in a terrible state of affairs in Central Asia and also in part of South Asia. These people are all pure mysterious miracle men. With them there is nothing but miracle upon miracle. They themselves work nothing but miracles, and their main study is to pick off the miraculous powers of the good as well as the evil deity, and to work all kinds of miracles themselves. Everyone can readily understand that there is already much satanic machination in the game, for with them the caste system is still at home. The common man is condemned to remain eternally dumb so that he cannot see through the make-believe miracles of the spiritual caste. Woe to the one who dares to ask a Brahma servant how he has done a miracle. For the first offence of this kind, the pretentious is rejected only with an immense beating. But a second time will already cost your life, or at least the eyes and the tongue. It is scarcely necessary to mention the fact that the inhabitants of this extremely dirty land will have a terrible fate in the spiritual realm, even worse than the Mohammedans. Spirits of these people of Brahma must be wholly moved into the polar ends of the earth, where the greatest desolation prevails. Only after many years would they become receptive to Christ. But this is all that can be said of them. Therefore, on to another party. "75. The Chinese from a spiritual point of view. 30th April 1847. Original content summary. The Chinese, as Zoroaster believers, somewhat better, but fatalists and rulers, therefore everything class-wise. Radical cures there. They, the Chinese, have smaller house gods besides the great god. Beautiful, useful commoner facilities alongside stupidities. Some good examples. They are the most numerous and mostly wealthy people. As stoic followers of Confucius, they are difficult to advance over there. Their diogenic self-satisfaction despises all the heavens, and even the glory of the everlasting love of the Almighty. Alongside the Brahmins, the Chinese, who have the so-called religion of Zoroaster, stand almost on the same level. These people are not so miracle-addicted, and therefore, in their own way, a hair better than the Brahmins. But in spite of this, they are very far behind in the actual formation of true Christians. For they are fatalists on the one hand, and on the other hand, the strictest pedantics, who have established up to here and no further. Their houses and their clothes must always have the same form. Also the food and drinks for each class and for each feast are precisely determined, as well as their compliments and their speeches. It cannot be perfected, but nothing can be worsened either. Diseases are treated according to class. The common people class is always cured by beating, for they say, an inner disease is thereby lured to the skin. This may then, when beaten properly blue, cut open in several places. Once it has been properly bluffed, then all evil material will go out. Cholera is cured besides the beating and skin cutting, also with cutting off of the tongue. The military is cured in an almost similar way, when one would fall ill. Only after such treatment, a kind of plaster is applied. This plaster is applied rather hot on the back and on the belly, and remains on until it falls off by itself. The nobler classes are cured with rhubarb and chinnarind. Only the emperor and court officials have the right to use the whole pharmacy in case of illness, which, however, consists of 10 medicines only, in the most extreme cases. This always remains the same. Those it helps, but those it does not help was destined to die. In addition to the one great God, whom they worship as the Supreme Being, they have a number of house gods who are to help them in small things. But with these house gods, it is usually a very unpleasant affair, and they have no longevity. For when a Chinese appeals to his house god, and the latter can of course not grant it to him, such a god will soon be deprived of his office, and from this point on he is deeply despised and beaten for 3 hours. Such a deity then taken to an old rest room, and in this way is retired. If there are already a number of such pensioned gods in the rest room, an auto da fe is held with them, and their useless ashes are thrown into a river. They are likewise very peculiar with the construction of their paths. A path must never go over anyone's land, but rather in a ditch in where nothing grows, or in which some stream flows. But this is less frequently the case, because the Chinese also know to fill the trenches. Bridges which extend for many miles over dry country are therefore a common sight, so that the ground under the bridge can still be used. This practice would be good, were it better constructed. But sometimes these bridges are so bad that the wanderer is hardly able to get over it, and would the bridge break somewhere, the victim, if he is still alive, must compensate for the damage, which happens not infrequently, as such a bridge are supposed to last a certain number of years. If it was already bad, nothing will be done to it, unless a hiker has fallen through somewhere, and then he must repair it. In addition to these bridges, there are also some main roads, which are only intended for heavy vehicles and the military. These main roads are never dry, and never without excrement, for these are usually alongside a stream or a brook, for which reason the Chinese usually go barefoot. Only when they leave the street do they wash their feet, and only then put on their very pointed sandals. The plots of land are almost just as defined as in Japan, except that they are not subject to the same penalties for violating the boundaries. Thus, the number of children that a countryman or citizen may have is still determined in many points. If he has more than one, he must immediately report this to the authorities, who will then issue him the edict of extermination. The midwives are usually used to exterminate the children, but these now know that Europeans buy such children from them. So if they can, they bring such children to the market, where also childless Chinese are allowed to buy these children. That this people, together with many stupidities, which at times even appear cruel, but does portray good qualities, are usually very sober, you can be assured of. Therefore, they have almost perpetual peace, and they have, although they have the greatest number of people in the world, also the greatest earthly wealth. But that with this people, as it is, there is nothing to be done in the spiritual world is self-evident. One have to be very careful with them if they were to be won for the true kingdom of the heavens. For according to the doctrine of their Confucius, they are, according to their totalitarian and terminism teachings, pure Stoics. But how difficult it is for a Stoic to be accessible to a better light has already been shown, namely in the representation of the spiritual sun. It is not easy to find on earth, besides the Japanese, a nation which observes its laws and doctrines as strictly as them. But it is precisely for this reason that they will not let go of their diogenic self-satisfaction for any price. But when this self-satisfaction has reached the highest culmination point, everything else is a bare zero. All the heavens and all the glory of the angels, yes, my own supreme glory, have no predominance with them. We have answered the why, as we have said, in the spiritual sun, and indeed in the evening of the general spiritual kingdom. But that these people are constant Stoics, can you already see from their state institutions? These people keep themselves in favour of their own. They keep themselves as their focal point. They regard themselves to be the inhabitants of the heavenly kingdom, and their excellence in everything overshadows everything on the earth. Their emperor is a pure son of heaven, and have his lineage straight from the sun. For this reason, this people also avoids, as much as possible, every communion with the rest of the peoples of the earth, and refuses to be instructed by anyone, because they know the best about everything. But as on this earth it is difficult to make something better out of a Chinese, and to bring him to another faith, it is still much more difficult to bring a departed spirit to a better conviction. But since we now know this people insofar as is necessary for the set purpose, we will no longer stay with them, but at once go to another. '76. The Tibetans from a spiritual point of view. May 1, 1847. Original content summary. In Asia's middle High Tibet, a people still lives with the ancient patriarchal constitution. Their religious basis is the unclouded Sanskrit, holy scripture of primitive time, with the Zendavesta, that is, the sacred visions containing Wars of Jehovah and the Book of the Prophets. There are also traces of knowledge of correspondences, general mysticism of the first rank. They firmly believe in God, but with absurd reverence. Curious penitential exercises. Role of these theocrats in the spirit world. About the difficulty of the faith of Christ for a deist. Advantages and good qualities of this people. Hospitality. The poor a sanctuary. Gospel of poverty. Right in the middle of Asia, in the High Tibet, there lives a people which still has the ancient patriarchal constitution. Among all the ancient religions of the so-called Parsias and Donas, the religion of this people is still the most unadulterated. They still have the proper Sanskrit, in which is contained the Zendavesta. For the Sanskrit is the holy writing of primitive times, and the mysteries of Zendavesta, in this language the holy visions, are historical traditions of the manifold, divine, miraculous guides of the human race in primitive times. It is therefore wrong where here and there some say that the Sanskrit and the Zendavesta are two kinds of books. It is only one whole book. And is divided into the book of the wars of Jehovah, and the book of the prophets. But as the prophets describe the deeds of God by their holy counsels, these seeming two books are really only one book, which is still quite unadulterated among the above-mentioned inhabitants of the High Tibet, and contains about the same things as I gave you, the Household of God, Volume 1, from the primordial age. Only there, in the original language, everything is still enveloped in mysterious images, which are difficult or impossible to unravel for the new age. Note, the existence of this ancient book, also mentioned in the Bible, has been briefly reported by Swedenborg in the last century, and the news of which was received by spirits about 40 years afterwards by a missionary from Tibet. However, a future decipherment of the ancient Sanskrit language and images by learned and laborious hieroglyphics will not be necessary here, since the Lord, in his most gracious love and wisdom, since 1840, has, among other things, also described the primordial creation and the primitive history of mankind until after the flood, as it were, to the new, and in the admirable clarity and corresponding intellectual understanding in the German language. Johannes Busch. Some of the patriarchs of this people still possess some of the old wisdom, by which this ancient writing is brought nearer to the human understanding by means of correspondences. But there can be no question of a thorough explanation. For where such secrets cannot be explained from my light, they always remain in a certain twilight, in which one can easily see an old half-decayed tree trunk for a bear. Man then becomes full of fear, and a powerful, mysterious depth finds a place in him. But when the sun is rising, all the deep secrets, filled with fear and anxiety, disappear, and the mysterious bear becomes a perfectly natural, half-decayed tree trunk. So it is with these ancient mysterious imagery. The viewer believes in depths upon depths, and wisdom upon wisdom needs to be discovered. Every tick seems to contain a solar revelation. But if any man come into my light, all these secrets will vanish, and in such a book he will find nothing but a faithful account of those, indeed miraculous facts, which I had to do for the people of this earth on account of their perfection. But such an explanation is not to be found among our high Tibetan inhabitants, but a mystery that is hardly credible for you. For this people is so full of mysticism that in this respect they are probably the first rank on the whole surface of the earth. There are many who formally speak with the stars, understand animal language, also talk with the trees and with the grass, as well as with the rocks, to create harmony with it with firm faith. Some of them may, in their opinion, be completely immortal. Others make themselves invisible, and most, however, are quite familiar with the spirits and live continually in their fellowship. In all this, however, they firmly believe in a God, for whom they have such an infinite reverence that they never dare to pronounce his name. Only the most ancient patriarchs are permitted, once a year, to pronounce the name of God. But in a place which is accessible to no one else. And on the day on which this name is pronounced, all the people professing this doctrine must lie on their faces from sunrise till sunset, and consume neither food nor drink. Reverence to God the Lord is, of course, right, but the principle of too much of anything is harmful is also applied here. For reverence, when it gets to such a horrendous exaggeration, destroys love. This alone is and always remains the basic condition of all life. Every fear, when it is increased to its highest culmination point, is fatal and gradually destroys all that is good. Only love alone increases life in the same degree as it is itself increased. As a result of this deepest reverence for the name of God, a lot of very silly and ridiculous penances are common among this people, which can also be found among the Brahmins, because the Brahmins are, in a way, descendants of this people, as well as of that religion. But in their fullest extent, they are still at home among our high Tibetans. It is not uncommon here to find penitents standing on one spot for 20 years. Also the hanging penitents, who push a hook through the skin and then hang up on a tree on a rope, where they hang until the rope breaks or the skin above the hook. Only a few can die because of such a penitential operation, because they are firstly mostly gently salved with cooling and healing oils by their relatives, and they are secondly fed 3 times a day with the best food available. There are also some penitents who chain themselves with heavy chains, and then often make a journey over 10 years through trenches, hills, and stone cobbles, and not infrequently making a journey of 200 miles, though not in a straight line. They have a great multitude of penitential works, which are nothing but a result of their exaggerated reverence for the name of God. These present almost sole theologians do not play a memorable role in the spirit world, for they too must receive Christ in the first place, which makes a rather heavy piece of work, which is due to their infinitely high idea of God. This makes it completely inconceivable to them that God could be degraded to a man, and even more incomprehensible that he has even allowed himself to be crucified by humans. But if Christ cannot even among you be seen as being divine, how much less do these people, who among all the peoples of the earth, have the most mysterious and sublime idea of God? One could also say that such a thing would not be possible for man, but with God all things are possible. But otherwise, however, this people has particularly praiseworthy qualities towards strangers and poor people. There is still the ancient perfect hospitality. Whoever comes to anyone is best served as long as he wishes to remain there. Every ministry is willingly offered to him if he is not too much at variance with his religious laws. If, however, any desire is only in a moderate contradiction with one's religious laws, it is nevertheless given out of esteem and respect for the stranger. But the victim who acted contrary to his law on behalf of the stranger then voluntarily exempts the prescribed repentance for his personal purification. Poor people are regarded as a sort of sanctuary, and one could say, good to him who was born poor there, for he is better off than all the wealthy of this people. But as good as it is to accept the poor, so too exists an exaggerated mercy towards the poor. For every man who is not inclined to work is soon seeking to become poor wherever possible, because he knows that he would then be carried on the hands by others. It is indeed a law in these people, wherein one is to be regarded as a poor. The poor are only the lame, crippled, blind, deaf, even the miserable and disabled, and old people of 70 years and over. These poor people are treated with the greatest respect and affection. But this excellent treatment not infrequently gives rise to the fact that the self-deprecated men mutilate themselves in order to be accepted into the class of the poor. So here is not much to be found of the in medio biti. It is, as I have already said, very good to do good to the poor. It is good to give drink to the thirsty, to sate the hungry, to clothe the naked, and to redeem the prisoners. But the poor should not be placed on a throne, for poverty shall always remain a testing of the spirit, and the poor shall seek help and find help with me, as they do with men. Now that we came to know these people, and cannot learn much more from them, let us turn to another next time. '77. The Japanese from a spiritual point of view. May 8th, 1847. In the first place, the Brahmins, the Chinese, and our high Tibetan inhabitants come as religious relatives of the Japanese, who, as they are now, also descended from Central Asia. They are, regarding religion, a mixture. They are like a so-called potpourri in this respect, having something of everything, and on the whole, nothing. They are Brahmins, Zoroasters, Parsas, and Donors, and thus Dalai Lamists, but also, like the Brahmins or Musists, the latter way. Even the evil deity still compel them to human sacrifices. With these human sacrifices, however, they do not take it so seriously, but yet enough that such sacrifices are still commonplace. The most beautiful boys and maidens must nevertheless be sacrificed at certain times. It is true that these boys and girls are no longer slaughtered, as was once the case. But twice the number of state criminals must then sink into the sea. You have already received a number of things on another occasion, which, if you wish, can be added to it. But from all this, do you also see that with these, in the highest degree stoic Japanese, is still less to be achieved than with the other Asian peoples so far mentioned? For up to now, there exist no other people as naturally inaccessible for anything spiritual than these, because of their highly developed stoicism. But it is still easier to approach these people naturally, more than spiritually, in the spiritual realm, since they are so entrenched that they are not easily approachable without causing some harm. This is because their stoicism develops a kind of spiritual deluge, which only angelic spirits from the third heaven can oppose. Spirits of a lower kind cannot enter this place, for it is worse than the actual hell itself. But the rarest thing about them is that no spirit from the real hell can approach them. If he dared to do so, he would be 1,000 times worse off than in the lowest hell himself. He would be instantly captured, bound, and tormented in the most terrible way. For you know that the so-called devils can tolerate humility the least of all, as well as truth and sincerity, and the contentedness which is conjoined with it, which surpasses all that is conceivable. All these virtues, humility, sincerity, the strictest love of truth, serviceability, self-denial to the deepest culminating point, then a love of order which no example second to it on earth, the greatest hospitality among themselves, the strictest justice. All that is found among the Japanese to such a degree that you cannot form a concept of it. There is never any talk of the transgression of any law. And if a person has accidentally committed a transgression without his knowledge or will, he himself seeks the most severe punishment for it. One can therefore say that the Japanese is the most virtuous people on the whole earth. He is completely permeated by sin, yet he also seeks the greatest reward, and self-satisfaction is his supreme happiness. The worst thing about this situation is, of course, that he does not need God for his own stoic self-satisfaction, if he already believes in him. And instead of loving God and to show him his heart's gratitude, He reproves him only for the fact that God made him a wise being, and at all to be a being conscious of himself and having any need. With him, everything is wasteful and useless pomp. For the Japanese says, "It is much better not to be useless." But when he understands that he cannot be of any use to God, and therefore he is considered useless, accusing God of foolishness, saying, "We are too insignificant and bad in God's sight, even to be a toy for God, but see ourselves to be so good and noble that we would prefer to be of good use to God if it were possible to serve him, the Almighty. But we are indeed what we are, and what wisdom is able to unravel it? Our worship and our sacrifice hardly reaches to the highest peaks of the mountains. What shall it be to him whom the earth, sun, moon, and stars can scarcely praise? We plough the fields, but he shows that the forests and meadows are better placed by his breath than our fields. We also build ships, but what are they compared to the buoyancy of the fish, and against the flying power of birds? We build great palaces and temples, but what are they compared to his earth, and compared to mountains that are upon it, wonderfully constructed by his hand? Did he create us that we should know him, that he might then have joy in our knowledge of him? When can an infinitely small worm know the infinitely great God as he is? Whoever is imperfect in one way is so also in another. How can God expect of us a perfect knowledge of himself? Certainly not forever, for the most imperfect can never take hold of the most perfect. As little as someone can draw the whole sea into a small pot. But can the sea be a joy when you take a pot full of it? So little can God have any joy if we can scarcely make the smallest spark out of his whole infinity. But if he rejoices in such a thing, then he cannot be wise, for it is impossible for us to enjoy such a thing, which we have very unnecessarily the smallest spark of his infinite wisdom. Likewise, Stoic philosophers are the vast majority among these men, and as you can easily see, are opposed to the actual satanic maxims of all blanks and straight lines. Therefore, as has already been remarked, a devil who wants to rule over all things will here be the worst off when he comes into this region, which are for the evil spirits also very peculiar. For these principles are for them the most unfavourable, by which not only all power of domineering, but every conceivable weight is pushed aside, by which any slight evaluation of one's being can be accomplished. But it is also evident from these reasons why only the strongest heavenly spirits can enter into such a region. The reason lies in the fact that weaker spirits can easily be captured by these rare principles, and that is precisely the predicated peculiar spiritual poison against which weaker spirits have to be most careful. You yourself, as you are, should not come into contact with a very stoic wise Japanese, If you would know his language well, you would not be able to reciprocate to him 1,000 times over. For the sake of reason, however, I do not allow, for the time being, the other peoples of the earth to enter into any close connection with these arch-Stoics, because they would soon be able to spread Japanism all over the world. For a Stoic alone, if educated atheistically, is not so dangerous, for it soon becomes a stumbling block because it has no roots. But a Stoic in connection with the most severe deism is the most dangerous for any spirit, because this Stoicism, with its strict faith in God, naturally has an indelible root. To instruct you into his nature would be very useless and even harmful. So we want to leave our Japanese again and go to another people. 78. The primordial inhabitants of Borneo and Guinea from a spiritual point of view. May 4th, 1847. Original content summary. The original inhabitants of Borneo and Guinea, Chinese descendants. Characteristics of the same. Government, religion. In the beyond, they are more accessible than Chinese. General reflection on the insane and the treatment of them. After their conversion, they are the most solid spirits. The inhabitants of the most significant islands of Borneo and Guinea has the same origin as the Japanese. It is self-evident that we are concerned here with the Aboriginal inhabitants, but not with the European inhabitants, who live here and there, dwelling at the coasts. The natives of these two islands are, as can be easily understood, Chinese descendants. The religion of China must therefore be upheld here too, and also have to, because the respective rulers of these islands still have to recognize the Emperor of China, and must also pay a tribute to it if the Emperor of China demands it. They do differ from the Chinese constitution and custom in various aspects, however, and thus also has some modifications in their religion. The king of the island is usually nicknamed the Gold-Footed Majesty, also the Son of the Moon, only not Son of the Sun, because this title of honor is due only to the emperor. The king, therefore, has a semi-divine reputation for the people, and must at certain times be worshipped, and the sacrifices which he determines must be amply offered to him on the appointed day. If the sacrifices are not abundant, the sacrificing priests shall be laid down upon the earth, and shall be severely punished by flogging, and a second sacrificial day shall be laid. But the priests, when they are beaten, must howl as loud as possible, and this howling must be imitated by anyone who hears it. It does not happen infrequently that the whole island would be brought into the most miserable bowl. The king, as a half-god, is also the wisest of his people, so his worship is also the imitation of his actions, provided he so wished and desired. If the king coughs, the whole country will soon cough. When he clears his throat, every throat must be cleared. If he settles down, everyone settles down in the country, and of course, when the conveyed message arrives that the king has seated himself. This does not happen constantly, but only in the days when the king wants it. No man, except the king and the chief priest, may worship the Supreme Being, because the common people are not worthy to worship and honour God. But every man who wishes to have some grace from God must go to a priest. This is the high priest, and he must first go to the king, so that the latter, as the sole worthy to present to God the cause of his people, will ask the grace required for him to do so. If a man would dare to bring forward his request to the Supreme Being alone, and if this were to be done, he was usually punished with death as a sinful and sacrilegious violator of the sole royal majesty. Yet, if he is of better origin, he will be beaten for an hour or so. But when he is rich and has a lot of gold, he can also get exemption of the punishment. But he has to measure 3 hours of gold for the royal treasure, for 1 hour of beating. It is self-evident that much fine wiles and tricks are used with this measure, since the exact measurement often consumes more than 4/5 of the time, and so on. And for that reason, the king has also changed the flogging exemption for an hour into 3 hours. But in order for the people to not easily transgress this most extreme commandment, it is permitted, same as with the Chinese, to procure house gods, which in the name of the king are consecrated by the priests, and thereby made active and effective. These house gods are usually extremely awkwardly made out of wood, exhibited in clay pagodas. They are increasingly revered by the people, the older and worse they look. In this aspect, do this people also differ from the Chinese? For the Chinese end up trashing their gods when they have not done anything for them. But this people is only concerned with the ancient gods, for the reason that, since so much was sacrificed to them, they are easier to persuade than the new ones, which are not so much hallowed by the sacrifices and prayers as the old ones yet. That there is not much to be done with such a people in the spiritual world will be easy to understand. But they are much more accessible to Christianity and to the pure gospel than the Chinese, and especially to the Japanese, but only with a very great deal of patience, and one must deal with them as if they were madmen to bring them on the right path. For like the madmen, these also have a number of highly false but fixed concepts, which, like old crayfish, are rooted in their souls. In order to heal them, a formal spiritual homeopathy must be employed, and they have to fast to eliminate all harmful things they have consumed before, and they will then be able to absorb and digest a new diet. But when these people are healed, they are stronger than 10 others, and has a courage and a love which cannot be compared with anything that you know here. Such a spirit, if possible, would suffer death 1,000 times under the most horrible pain, but will never deviate only a hair's breadth from the prescribed order. For this reason are these spirits also put under the protection of those who dwelled in these regions. And when they leave the earth, these spirits are almost exclusively destined to bring their countrymen on the right path. As has been shown here, these two islands are typified with very few remarkable differences. But the Borneans are a little gentler than the Guineans. With this we will be finished with these two peoples, and we shall soon begin to examine another. '79. Primordial inhabitants of Java and other small Asian islands from a spiritual point of view. May 5, 1847. Original content summary. The other small Asian islands, the Javanese, a tribe of its own. The interior of Java, unhealthy by toxic exhalations. Their peculiar Janus-like god. Other local conditions. The Valley of Death with the Bahanupis trees. Poisonous caves with combustible gases. They also have the Quran and the Bible. Advantages of these people over the previous. They are grounded in nothing, and therefore not in error. Significant advice about love. Instruction in the hereafter. Excellency of the converted spirits of these people. The inhabitants of most of the islands surrounding Asia have a more or less similar constitution, though some of them are almost entirely of the Roman Catholic or Protestant religion. Only the island of Java makes a real exception. This island is inhabited its own tribe. It goes without saying that only the Aborigines are to be understood. The island itself is governed by China by means of a viceroy, but its coasts are mostly inhabited by Europeans. But the interior of the country is still very seldomly visited by the Europeans, because they cannot stand it too long, whether it be the manifold poisonous exhalations which are prevalent on this island in a very high degree. The Aborigines, on the other hand, are already somewhat more acclimatized, and their whole physique is by far more suited to the harmless absorption of these poisonous vapours than the European. Just like the peculiar climate, the inhabitants have the most peculiar concept of divinity. They recognize only one God, but this God has two bodies, which are grown together back to back. These two bodies has one head, which has two faces. The one body is wholly white, the other is dark grey. In the daytime, the divinity turns the white part of its body and face toward man. But at night, the dark grey side. From the white part there is nothing but good. From the dark, nothing but terror and evil. Therefore, no one easily dares to walk about at night, because nothing good, but only terrible and evil can befall him. The reason lies, however, in the fact that on this island, especially in the inner valleys of the island, a poisonous vapour is continually produced, which kill Europeans, and make the natives at least considerably sick, and can sometimes even kill them if they have inhaled too much of such vapours. But for the reason that the native inhabitants of this island generally live on the mountains, and during the day when the sun has already risen high, and have driven away the evil vapours, they enter the valleys to do the necessary work. But one valley of this land is completely uninhabited, and the inhabitants call it the Valley of Death. In this valley are poisonous trees called bohonupus, which have been mentioned on many occasions, which spread their poisonous vapour through this whole valley for several miles, that no living creature can defy it in any way. The kings of this country would send criminals who are condemned to death here, where they must walk into this valley, inhaling the poisonous resin of this tree, by which means also adulterous women are killed. Only the king is in possession of this poison in a properly sealed golden container, and when it is needed, only a small tip of a needle need be dipped in it, and the slightest scratch on a person will cause in only a few minutes the most horrible pain in the body. When 100 are sent into the valley, usually no more than 2 come back, and then they are granted life. When these unhappy ones are sent out, they must determine the exact direction of the wind. If the wind blows towards the little poison tree, they must follow the wind. But if the wind pushes, they must quickly take flight again, for when they have reached the air layer of this poisonous grove, they are lost without salvation. If, however, the wind continue for a long time in the same direction, they may go near one or more of the little trees, and then cautiously do their plight, after which they will hurriedly return against the wind, not resting for about 10 miles until they are safe from the effects of the poisonous air of this valley, which is really only a 20-mile long and 1-mile wide cauldron, in which there is no drop of water, and no other grass or growth, for everything dies because of the vapour of this poisonous tree. Likewise are there also caves in this country, from which a constant poisonous vapour rises, but it does not spread so far in its poisonous intensity as the poisonous miasm of the poison tree described above, and the natives can sometimes very closely approach such caves, but of course behind the wind. They would then hurl burning bundles into such a cavity, quickly igniting this effervescent and most flammable gas, which then burns continuously for a long time. But when it burns, it is also quite harmless. The strange nature of this country is then also the reason of the strange spiritual formation of these people, as has already been noted above. Their double deity already stems from this. But what is strange for you again is that the inhabitants do not attach much importance to this deity of theirs. They also have the Alcoran, and now also the Bible. Some of them prefer the Bible, some still the Quran, but their divinity has already almost completely been sidetracked. Some of them are of the opinion that a perfect man should know all religions and take the best from them. Others say that among the many religions, only one can be the right one. But to find out which one would be the most difficult task for the wisest among them. Therefore, it would be best to do something for all of them in the meantime, until one discover the right one. Because in every religion, something wise and something stupid can be found. One therefore only pays homage to the wisdom in every religion and rejects the stupidities, whereby one finally becomes so wise to find out the best one from the many religions. These people are basically not so stupid as someone would initially want to believe, because they are grounded in nothingness. But they are also the most accessible in the spiritual realm. They only have difficulty with love, because in this world they hold love for the greatest stupidity. But the reason for this lies therein that, under the concept of love, they understand merely the passion which is similar to a rage, by which the intercourse of the two sexes takes the form of a blind rage and drives the animal-like fornication, putting the wisdom of man below the lowest animals. But as is very easy to see, this is only a quite erroneous concept of love, where one takes a false and erroneous impulse of love for all love. If the spirits of these people are clear about this concept, then they are the most capable beings in the kingdom of spirits, at the same time the most willing and the most punctual in the fulfillment of every business entrusted to them. This is something especially memorable about this people. For this reason, they are described rather extensively here. '80. The original inhabitants of Sumatra, Celebes and Ceylon, from a spiritual point of view. May 6, 1847. Original content summary. The peoples of Sumatra and Celebes. Those of Ceylon, that is, the natives. Land of the largest natural wonders. Reason for this peculiarity: the wild hunt, Fata Morgana's nightly fireworks, dancing fire columns, the apartments there in the holes of the earth, their religious view, their chief priest is ruler, the most unselfish priesthood on earth. Effect of this behaviour: immense prestige and unlimited love, miraculous power. Court of this chief priest: its inadequacy for Europeans. They are deists. Their island is the world. Their other religious, spiritual, etc. views. Their opinion about Christ. Otherwise good insights. This people has in its simplicity still the type of psychic abilities primitives times. They are Zendavesta followers and, note well, understanding and loving Jesus so they can easily come to the truth. In the neighbourhood of our previously described island of Java, there are two larger islands called Sumatra and Celebes. The people of these two islands are generally under the same constitution, and it would be unnecessary to repeat here what has already been given. Only so much can be said that Sumatra is in every respect closer related to the island of Java than to the island of Celebes, which it is much more truly Chinese, and sometimes also Borneoanish, although there are Javanese among the Celebes. But that on both islands, and particularly on the coasts, Europeans also have access and even settlements brought about by the present conquests of the English, sometimes even the French, the Dutch, and the Spaniards, scarcely needs to be mentioned. Ceylon. Therefore, we want to turn to another island, Ceylon, which, on its shores, has mostly European settlements, but still contains indigenous inhabitants in its many gorges, caves, and grottos. This island is praised by many travellers as a land of incomprehensible wonders, and visited by many naturalists because of the strange phenomena. It is true that this island, of purely volcanic origin, has the greatest subterranean connections, which are even connected with the living bowels of the earth through large canals. That this causes some strange phenomena which do not occur elsewhere will be easy for you to understand if you look back on everything that was communicated to you in the natural part of the earth's body, and partly also in the spiritual part of it. The phenomena of the so-called wild hunt, which are not unknown to you, not infrequently manifest with such intensity that its din often grow to such a vehemence that the inhabitants hide themselves in the deepest holes in order to prevent damage to their hearing. In addition to these disturbing phenomena, there is an even greater quantity of meteoric phenomena, which at certain times occupy no less the eye than the noise would the ear. Mirages of the rarest kind are almost in the order of the day, but they are always gentle and tend to enrapture the observers rather than fill them with any fear. But terrifying and frightful are the nocturnal fiery phenomena, which also occasionally cause small local devastations. These fiery phenomena sometimes consist of a multitude of the so-called shooting stars, which shoots in all directions, sometimes very low, sometimes only a few clafters above the ground. This fiery appearance is the least feared. Somewhat more terrifying are those which sometimes flocks in thousands on the ground, and sometimes only a few feet above these, the fire men, fire dragons, fire snakes, and the like. These phenomena are indeed very surprising and terrifying, especially because of their beautiful bright white light. But they are not dangerous to anyone, because their light is quite cold. More feared are the fire wheels and fire wreaths, which are of course a little rarer. These set certain materially related objects on fire, and people and animals, if they are touched by these wheels and wreaths, get electric shocks, and sometimes also significantly painful burns. But the most feared in this country are the so-called dancing fire columns, which are basically nothing but fire tornadoes. These cause the greatest devastation where and when they appear. However, they occur only rarely, barely 2 or 3 times in a year, and usually only in certain places. And when they appear, they are announced a whole day in advance by a certain crackling in the air, which becomes louder and louder, at which appearance people and animals flee into their hiding places. For in the interior of this island, there are almost no huts at all, and even fewer houses, and, as has been shown before, people and animals live in holes in the ground, which the people who inhabit them decorate with all kinds of clumsy carvings and braidworks. The inhabitants of this island have no king, but only a kind of chief priest, who has the reputation of a sorcerer, and whom the people believe to be the master of all these wonderful phenomena of this country. This sorcerer also has a considerable amount of assistants whom he teaches and then places them in all parts of this country, which have the business of instructing the people in the particular religion, and also to prescribe the manner of behaviour necessary to avoid any damage from the phenomena. The rare thing about this matter is that this chief priest, together with his assistants, is the most benevolent priesthood on the whole surface of the earth, for he does not require any gift in the least. Only the assistants are allowed to accept food and drink when they go among the people. But the people, perceiving the benevolence of this priest, is eager to give him the most beautiful and exquisite animals of their herds, of which he never takes anything more than what he needs for his very simple household supplies. But for this reason, he enjoys such a tremendous respect among the people, and a love so unlimited, that he only need to be waving in case of need, and the whole nation, great and small, would be equipped and on their feet to be his greatest benefactor, as well as his protector. You may find it strange about this so-called spell priest that he, as well as his assistants, really possesses a magical power by means of which he can command all the animals. and they follow him on a wink, and no animal from the greatest to the smallest on this island is excluded. This, however, also procures him the greatest respect when he sometimes passes through a whole pack of rapacious animals completely uninjured, as if through a flock of sheep. Serpents, snakes, crocodiles are an ordinary sight on this magician's yard, and not one of these animals dare to make the slightest movement without his hint. Only when he commands them do they move quickly from their court and seek their food. The court of this chief priest is roughly in the middle of this island and is completely inaccessible to any European, partly because of the very dense scrub, partly because of steep, near unsurpassed rocky mountains, and partly also because the many troops of animals are here more abundantly at home than anywhere else. The natural phenomena discussed above, which even the most courageous Europeans do not trust so much, are a considerable obstacle, and so this island remains accessible only along the coasts at the European settlements. But the interior knows as little about the Europeans as does the interior of Africa and many other countries. The religion of this people is just as rare as their country. They believe in a God who, however, is not visible to any mortal and is conceivable in his way. But this God, from time to time, consecrates a man who, in his name, takes care of the earthly affairs because they are too petty for God and too unworthy of him. They hold their island for the whole world, which floats like a nut on the endless waters. Sun, moon, and stars are ruled by God alone, but the management of the earth, which is too small to be guided by God alone, is the concern of the chief priest, consecrated by God. For the people have the grandest idea of the stars, and holds the smallest star as infinitely greater than the earth. But God is in the sun, therefore the sun is also worshipped by them. But they regard the moon as a heavenly world, where they and their chief priest go after the death of the body, when they have lived uprightly and modestly on their small earth. Only with the stars do they fare somewhat worse, for these people merely populate them with animal souls, which, according to their belief, are much greater and more perfect than on their earth. They know little about Christ, and now and then there are some who know nothing at all about him. They are of the opinion that he was once a chief priest on their island, but he had removed his hand and went to some other earth to make the people happy there, because their ancestors became disobedient to him. For though they regard their land as the only earth, they nevertheless believe that there may be in the sea, which is infinite in their opinion, other floating world bodies on which similar people reside. But they are nowhere as perfect as they are. They came to this conclusion due to circumstances, having had not infrequent encounters with Europeans, discovering that they are not so perfect masters of animals as they themselves are. They have also sometimes seen the fleets of ships, and have heard the cannonade. But they think that this is a pure play of children, for the fireworks which their chief priest brings out is not to be compared with the triviality of a cannon flash, and the floating ship they hold for a merely floating hollowed-out egg, which was laid by a mighty fire dragon. They exceedingly despise the luxury articles offered to them by the Europeans. For they say, "We bring about greater things with our will than you do with your hands." There is therefore no trade possible with these people. The coastal inhabitants deal only with elephant teeth, which are usually obtained free of charge from the indigenous people. The island offers besides this nothing commercial. By this account you can easily see that this people is still very simple and knows very few needs. Exactly because of this simplicity, however, there still exists in the vigorous type of psychic sphere which was natural to the primitive peoples of the earth. They still have the same spiritual power which once the first people of the earth possessed. According to their religion, they are still the purest Zendavestas, and have also, up to the present, neither added nor taken away anything from it. With these people, it is an easy task in the spirit world to introduce them to the gospel, for they easily love Christ, and are initially of the inclination to follow him in the beyond as their chief priest, initiated by God in their world, whom their ancestors not readily obeyed, transferring this original sin to all descendants. Therefore, every one the afterlife needs to please this insulted man of God. This reason is, indeed, somewhat ridiculous, but it is easy to see that, in spite of that, it is nevertheless a good point of reference, whereby the people of this country can come to the light of the true gospel. There is nothing more worthy of note in these people, so we shall return to another country next time. '81. Madagascar from a spiritual point of view. May 8th, 1847. Original content summary. The actual inhabitants of Madagascar are from Asia and from there populated South Africa. They are the actual Cainites, therefore their intellectual formation is still low. They alone put the female gender above the male. Feminine manner, their philosophy, a peculiar religion, and the reason for it. The greatest chastity on earth. Whites are only half men. An El Dorado Lucifer. Difficult accessibility of the coasts of the country, and likewise entrance of these people in the hereafter. Fate of these souls after death. Reincarnation. After the island of Ceylon, the larger island of Madagascar belongs to Africa. This island is inhabited by a very peculiar people who settled here from Asia during the prehistoric times. But it is not to be thought that this people inhabited this island from Africa, but it was in fact the reverse. Southern Africa was mostly populated from this island. The inhabitants are mostly Moors, while the inhabitants of the former island are either brown, sometimes dark brown in colour. The inhabitants of Madagascar have a perfectly black skin colour. Among them only very few are dark copper brown. These people, with a few exceptions, are still the very actual Cainites, in whom the formation of the spirit is still at the lowest level. They have a concept of a supreme being, but this is as dark as her skin colour. This people is the only one that sets the female gender above the male, therefore a queen and never a king, of a perfectly divine appearance, sits upon the throne, and governs her people completely at whim and despotically. But the reason for the fact that the feminine gender prevails here is that their wise ones, who are all women, teach the people to think that the woman is more perfect than the man. The man is seen in his muscular pits, that he is not yet filled, while the woman is already finished with what is only beginning with men. Thus, the man has no breasts, therefore he cannot have such deep and wise feelings as the women. The man is also much more hairy than the woman, thus closer to the animal gender than the woman. The man also has an animal elongated extension between the legs like the monkey, which no longer occurs in women. Then the woman is much more noble and beautiful than the man, and the human race comes only from her. She would demand intercourse, but yet how little value creation has placed on the work of the man, and how much woman stands higher than the man, could be seen most clearly from this generational work. The work of the man only lasted for so many moments, as he has fingers on his hands. But for the woman, it would cost so many months. The duration of time clearly determines the hardly calculable advantage of the female gender above the male. From such philosophies, these feminine modes of their gender show incalculable virtue, and even prove that the Supreme Being, if it be somewhere, is itself a most perfect woman. They also have temples in which they worship and revere above all the woman as the Godhead. And the chief objects of worship in women are the genitals, and then the breast. When they perform their main service, which happens every full moon, the most sublime moment in this service is when a naked living woman stands on the altar, puts her hands on the genitals, and soon begins to urinate. At the moment of urinating, all the male gender falls down on the face and is then urinated on by the female. A similar divine worship is also to be found in some tribes of Africa, who, of course, have brought the same from their motherland. The female genital, which is easily understandable, is so highly revered because from it the human generation derives its origin. It is remarkable that there is no more chaste and prudent people living on the earth's surface than this one here, with regard to the satisfaction of carnal desire. Except for the temple, no procreation is allowed, having immediate death penalty, and this may only be carried out at a given time, only once a year, after a number of acts of worship have been carried out according to their concepts. And when the generation takes place, it must be completely dark in the temple. The woman, however, has the right to be satisfied by her slaves more often if she desires it. But if a man were to demand a woman, that will already be a high crime. The white people are regarded as only half humans, who can be hunted if one wants to have some good meat. If a captured white man pleases her well, and a Madagascar woman finds a special delight in him, she can give him life, and keep him as a ridiculous monkey for their entertainment, where he would, do understand, often do things which would, as you would say, is too bad for the devil. The men, when they are caught, fare still somewhat better, but the women are slaughtered and roasted without mercy and pardon, because the women of the whites are held by these black women for mere animals. How far these people are still from the spiritual formation, as still very inaccessible to the gospel, can be seen from this little. There have indeed already been attempts, now and then on the coast, but up until now, everything had been in vain, for, it may be said, Lucifer still led his regiment quite unperturbed. The land itself, however, is also placed in such a way as to offer the greatest defiance to the entrance of every great power, because this island is only accessible on very few points. The sea is round about in great extent full of cliffs and shallows. With larger vessels it is almost impossible to access, but in a few places only in barges when the sea is calm. And visitors of this land must be very careful not to get into the hands of the Madagascarians, who are lurking everywhere. The Queen of this country also continually supervises its coasts, and the whole coast is continually covered with impenetrable scrub, which is also populated by a multitude of evil vermin, like all sorts of poisonous worms and insects, against which only the natives protect themselves by means of painting themselves with a certain plant. At certain times, especially in the spring, in the summer and half of autumn, altogether half a year, this island is not accessible, for it is swarming with trillions of great flying ants, called muscats by some naturalists, which are much more annoying than the mosquitoes of the American islands. When at that time a European would be at the coast, and is attacked by a swarm of these muscats, he will be a dead corpse within a few minutes. The natives, however, are not attacked by them, because the smell of the herb with which the natives smear themselves is highly intolerable to them. From this brief description, you will easily see what it is with this more than pagan people in the spiritual world. it is very difficult to deal with them. Indeed, they could more easily be washed white than to awaken their spirits for the gospel. Souls of such people either become the so-called nature spirits, or they are taken to another planet, where they are again given a lighter material covering, and thus still a material life, in which they become more and more receptive to the gospel. Only very few will, after the death of their body, come to the right realization with great difficulty. These nature spirits, however, are put into the flesh by procreation in the course of time, either once again in a better part of the earth, or they are also led to another planet. Now you know enough of this very shrunken people of the earth. We therefore do not want to stay with them any longer, but instead go over to their neighbours. 82. Primitive inhabitants of South Africa, natives, from a spiritual point of view. May 10, 1847. Original content summary. The peoples of South Africa, fetishists, they have neither king nor chief, but live in hordes, eat raw flesh and drink blood. Cannibals, no articulated language. They are little good, their simplicity and curiosity. Great difference between these souls and that of the former in the spirit world. On the other hand, are they much higher than the previous? The former slavery abomination, compensation for the slave souls in the beyond. Their lord's incense of hell, painful reflection. These peoples, who inhabits the greatest part of southern Africa, are first of all still stuck in all sorts of more than heathenish customs and traditions. Their religion is not infrequently even worse than that of the Madagascarians. There are the actual fetishists who worship very natural objects, whether they are of use to them or not, but simply because they have first seen them with their eyes on a certain day of the year. Such objects can be a tree stump, a worm, a crocodile, a bird, a monkey, or even a stone. In short, anything that is called a body can be used as a worshipful deity. These peoples have no king, no queen, in which they are very different from the Madagascarians. They live merely in hordes like the monkeys on the trees, and feed themselves mostly through all kinds of robbery and hunting. They eat their meat completely raw, and from the skins they usually make hammocks for beds, hanging from tree branches. They have only a few fruits. Animal milk is almost unknown to them. They prefer to drink the blood of animals. These hordes also often wage war, especially at the time of larger animal hunts, where the hunters, less fortunate in the hunt, usually overthrow the happy ones and chase them away if possible. The hunters who have been killed on both fronts are then also taken by the victorious party as a hunt for hunting, and gets consumed first. But white people are a treat for them, so that they often sneak up to the shores in order to hunt a white-clad monkey, as they think, which species of monkey has the most savoury flesh for their palate. The strongest of such a horde is usually the leader, but he has nothing to command, but merely to indicate what has to be done. And this indication is usually to instigate the attack, with the whole horde following his example. These peoples also have no articulate language, but they only communicate either by signs with their hands or by certain clicks with the tongue. The Europeans call these peoples by the names Kaffir, Hottentotten, Bushmanner and rock climbers. Many of these hordes, of which there are thousands, have been cultivated as much as possible, especially along the coasts. But many more in the interior of the country are still in the old, complete animalistic brutality. The only good thing these peoples have is that they have the very least needs of life, and they are very inquisitive. If missionaries come to them, of course, at first, with proper escort, they have an easy game with these people, provided that they understand each other. But this is not too difficult, for these peoples, because of their natural minimalistic needs and few quite natural signs, are initially often easy to deal with. As wild and near completely animalistic these peoples are they in the spiritual world far superior to the inhabitants of Madagascar. And such peoples are overall either very difficult or not accessible at all, due to their internal country political causes. And these above-mentioned savage peoples are just as easy to reach as the things of the earth to which they are attached. One can put everything to use, no matter how inconspicuous, if one can only get hold of it. But the glorious things occurring in such places on the earth that cannot be reached and entered into by anybody can be used for nothing, and is as good as if they were not present. More to the western part, on the coast of this world region, there are indeed tribes under a king, also here and there under a queen. These tribes are the most miserable because they are used for human trafficking, and some kings have gone so far as to raise human studs, as you would with animals, to produce more slaves for the trade to America. The strongest and most fertile women are gathered into thousands for these studs, and slept with by the strongest men. If they fall pregnant, they must do their ordinary work. Only a few days before the birth, they are driven back to the designated place to give their fruit to the world, which fruit they have to sustain for a year with their breasts. After this time, the children are taken from them and handed over to the public nutrition center. 6 weeks after the birth, such a woman must be laid with again, and so on, until some of them have not infrequently given birth to 26 children. If such a woman is still strong enough for such a service, she can still be sold as a slave. But if she is too weak, she is expelled and must find her own food. In addition to this manipulation, however, to these black rulers, wherever possible, let the slaves be kept in confinement in order to be available for trade. Presently, this horrible disorder has indeed already been fairly controlled in many places, but in the more remote areas there are still a lot of such abominations. The sold slaves have in this world, unfortunately, a dreadful lot with the Christian peoples, and for this reason are they in the hereafter being kept back to be as harmless as possible. But those disgraces of kings and queens are the most terrible carcasses of hell, for their wickedness transcends all concepts, and the hardness of their hearts can crush a diamond. With these, in the spirit world, nothing else can be done than to use them for the incense of the lowest hell. There are among them queens who want to be worshipped as the actual Godhead. And when such a queen dies, which is certainly a shameful thing for the Godhead, and to alleviate the shame, at least a few hundred have to die with the Goddess, and some may even be buried alive with her, lest the queen in the tomb become bored. That very little can be achieved with such people, on the other side, and no extraordinary successes can be expected, even by a second incarnation, can easily be seen from the fruits which have so far escaped from the numerous attempts at the correction of Satan. But this is really not much. If a potter has a pot which does not want to succeed, what is it if he demolishes it and throws it out into the street, where it may be used as a road dirt, if it has already proved itself to be a useless pot? Or what is it for a musician with a free imagination, if he has played a piece, but did not put it to paper? Does he not have the ability to put all the other 1,000 pieces he have played and lost before on paper, whenever he wants to? Therefore, we leave these wayward pots of peoples and return to another nation. '83. Primordial inhabitants of Australia, Aborigines, from a spiritual point of view. 12 May 1847. Original content summary. The original inhabitants of Australia, the largest island. They are pure natural beings. They are usually peaceful, have no fear of death nor of pain. Snake-eaters, abhorrence of clothed people. They are Cainites of the best kind, with vague knowledge of the prehistory of God. Magnificent bird world there. The philosophy of these people about it. their food treatment of different types of meat, their primordial style dwellings, wise installation of these dwellings, etc. Half monarchic tribes there, especially in the north. Their sharp-smelling ability. The religion of these northern ones are more Chinese. These are, on the other hand, more difficult to bring to the truth than the first true Aborigines. The latter are masters of grass weaving. These are better off in the hereafter than many cultured Christian sects. In addition to these wild African tribes, there are also the same races in what you call the fifth part of the world, called Australia. This part of the world, or rather this largest island on the earth, has especially in its interior a considerable number of peoples to which almost no ray of human formation has yet reached. There are still, as you say, pure natural people, but they have nothing evil in themselves. They are exceedingly peaceful. They know nothing of war, although they don't fear death in the least. On the contrary, they often have a great longing for it. They can also endure physical pains with an indifference which is scarcely comprehensible to you. Therefore, they can bear the greatest hardships of life with the greatest equanimity. Battles with wild beasts are an entertaining game. They are also the greatest masters of serpents, and they always go out with the greatest desire for this catch, because these animals are the most delicious treats for them. When they see some strange newcomers somewhere, they usually take flight, less out of fear than from a sort of revulsion which they have for the clad Europeans, as well as Asians, for nothing is more disgusting and more annoying to them than a clothed man. They are also Cainites, but of the best kind, and have a vague concept of primordial times and of a supreme being. They do not worship the supreme being, however, but leave this to the birds in the air, which animal species is nowhere more beautiful and so rich than in this part of the world. These people say, God does not look for worship, but only for man's work, and has created heavenly figures flying over them, observing what they do. And when they have observed them, they soon fly up again to the stars, and tell it to the Supreme Being, how the people below perform on the earth. These people are therefore also very happy when they see a lot of birds flying around, for they conclude that God is very interested in them when he presents them with a great many observers. They consequently have little regard for the non-flying birds like turkeys, of which there are many, as well as great many other poultry, so they eat them, but always raw, for it is the rule that the poultry must be raw. The meat of the tame four-footed animals merely salted and dried in the air. The fish must be boiled, and the earthworms, as there are all sorts of snakes, lizards, and crocodiles, fried in the fire. But fruits must be enjoyed as they grow, when they are ripe. But the best fruit of all is the coconut, which gives them everything: drink, butter, and some kind of bread. These people rarely have houses or huts, and if they have anything like that, they still have it almost in the way the primitive people have had. Dense groups of trees are encircled with a kind of living fence, and an entrance is left on only one side. Such a living tree group is usually the house of an entire family, often very numerous. In the interior, everything is entirely shaded, but it looks like an impenetrable thicket, so that it would not be easy to get into such a house anywhere else than through the usual entrance gate, which leads into the actual dwelling with the most curvatures possible. Such a door, or better said an alley, is not infrequently an hour long, and is a true maze, which a stranger does not easily pass through without losing his way at least 100 times. This entrance, however, is so cunningly made that one of a foreign nation or wild beasts cannot find it and attack it at night. Along this winding paths, for the sake of greater safety, are not infrequently 2 klafter deep pits, usually as wide as the path itself, about 3 to 4 feet, and 1.5 klafter long. These burrows are covered in daytime, but at night they are uncovered again, and this is a good protection for their house. For not even a mouse can pass through the undergrowth, which has grown so densely together that one cannot easily put a finger through it, let alone any other animal or man, especially in old dwellings, where the living fence garden surrounds the dense old tree group at a distance of 300 to 400 klafter. The most terrible thing for them is when a tree of their living house begins to wear out due to old age. Everything is done to revive such a tree, but if all is of no use, it will be carefully removed from above, as a house among you, from branch to branch and down to the root. The old tree is completely removed. Then fire is made on its trunk, and the whole tree is slowly burned. This incineration process often lasts several days long, and when the ground has cooled down, a different tree is planted and nurtured in its place, so that it can replace its predecessor as soon as possible. It is, however, very unfortunate that these people, when, especially in the present time, frequently greedy Europeans come to their beloved dwellings and ignite them from outside, which of course force the poor inhabitants to leave their dwellings if possible, but in most cases they are suffocated by the dense smoke. These actions of the Europeans also fills these poor innocent people with an indelible revulsion against clothed people. There are similar original tribes now only in mid-South Australia. For the east, the north and the west are for the most part under English and Dutch rule. In some northern regions, however, there are indeed some tolerated primordial tribes, which, however, differ from the actual ones in that they have a kind of royal leader, and they have a constitution quite similar to that of the Borneans. These chiefs also have a kind of military, which still has the usual bows for weapons. They also have a very keen sense of smell, by means of which such an Australian warrior smells an enemy an hour away. The sense of smell is indeed very acute among the native inhabitants of this part of the world, but they make less use of it than the conquered tribes of the north of this continent. Religion in the northern countries is already more Chinese, although sometimes also primordial Australian. Therefore, they are not so easily moved to Christianity in the spirit world as the original inhabitants of this part of the world. A greater degree of culture is present in the case of the northern inhabitants, though, than in the very simple southern inhabitants, who, apart from a kind of pickaxe and a kind of carving knife, do not know any other agricultural implements. But they are masters in the weaving of all sorts of wattle grass, roots, and a kind of cotton, but these are only used to decorate their dwellings. Otherwise they are mostly naked, and they sometimes tattoo their skin instead of clothing. But this is not the case with all of them. The fact that these simple, innocent, exceedingly good-natured people in the spirit world can very easily be introduced to Christianity has already been mentioned, and it is not necessary either, because it fares much better with such a man on the other side than with a stupid, imagined sectarian. But we need to know nothing more about this people, because everything else is only for statistics, but not for our spiritual view of the people. Therefore we shall move over to another tribe. '84. Primordial inhabitants of New Zealand, Central Africa, and America, from a spiritual point of view. May 14, 1847. Original content summary. Native inhabitants of New Zealand. These continue to grow easily in the spirit world. Their just reverence for the Supreme Being. They soon accepted the redeeming doctrine of the incarnation of the Lord, and they longed to know Jesus personally. They become exquisitely good and solid spirits. What important works are entrusted to them? Hover over the peoples of the many other islands, the wild in America, the humanity in Central Africa, cockroaches and gazillas, whites and piebalds with albino eyes. They have the second face, are gentle souls, and they have a genuine inner gospel. New Zealand. There is still a very important island in the south of the earth, New Zealand. It actually consists of 3 main islands, and then still from a lot of small islands and very many coral banks. The priests of this island have already been shown to you like many others, on another occasion, in their nature, in religion, and in their precarious relations with the Europeans. So you can read it there for a closer look at this people. Nevertheless, it can still be said here how this people is received in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, it is fairly easy, for they have an extraordinary reverence for the Supreme Being, and for all the wonderfully shaped things. If then, in the spirit world, as in the real world of miracles, they would be led to phenomena which presuppose them to the incarnation of the Lord, they soon ask with curiosity about the actual development. They will immediately receive what they are told. When they acquire such a knowledge, they have a very great joy in it, and soon desire nothing more than to know the Lord personally as soon as possible. But this must be done with caution, otherwise these human spirits would be grabbed by a sudden, too strong love, which would rather weaken than strengthen the spirit through the sudden, too great strength. When, however, they are gradually prepared, they will find themselves in the presence of the Lord, with that wise temperance of love, which condition is most beneficial to them. But once they are introduced into the presence of the Lord, then they remain fixed, and they are unchangeably active in all the works of love. They are chiefly entrusted with the supervision of the south pole of the earth, as well as with the principal direction of the moon, in which business they remain as long as it is my will. Who knows exactly how long I have to leave the spirits in certain offices? What happens after such offices with such spirits is determined by their inner abilities acquired in such entrusted business. But since there are many dwellings in the house of the Father, there will be many further more occupations. You also do not need to know more, for this will be reserved for the right moment in time, when you yourself will gain the right experiences in your spirit. In addition to these people, there are still a number of inhabitants of smaller islands whose spiritual fate has a certain resemblance to one or the other of the before-mentioned peoples. So it is not necessary to properly portray each of the thousands of islands, which would be useless and would cause unnecessary extensive work. America. Likewise, there are still a few savages in America who, in their spiritual state, differ very little from the wild tribes hitherto described. African albinos and spotted people. As a human rarity in the high Africa, mostly at rivers, still exists an own kind of people. The one is completely white, and the other white and black spotted. The first species is called the rabbit people or cockroaches. The second, the gazillas or also magpie people. Both kinds of people are in underground caves during the day. Only at night time they go out to hunt something for their food. The reason that they leave their caves only at night is their extremely sensitive eyes. But while they flee the earthly day, they are no enemies of the spiritual day. And both kinds of people have therefore the continual second sight, and are as delicate and gentle in their souls as they are in their earthly physique. Admittedly, they have little external knowledge of the gospel here on earth, and rarely meet with missionaries. But all the same, they have an inner gospel, which is more genuine for their nature than that which not infrequently is brought and preached to the savage tribes by missionaries who are extremely addicted to fame and greed. With these rare types of people, however, we have also come to the end of the actual spiritual description of the earth. Therefore, in order to bring what has been said so far about non-Christian peoples to a proper understanding, we will only add a few more things, and thus close this work with blessings for you. '85. Reason and purpose of these narrations to Lorber. The otherworldly author. Replies to criticism. May 15, 1847. Original content summary. Again about the hay and straw for the world scholars. The goal of this instruction gives them matter for ruminating. This description of the peoples is given according to the inner truth, not in appearance, as in other descriptions. Criticisms of such. Authorization of our Beata to these announcements. Reason for the announcement of this third part. To revive the spirit. Discuss the apparent contradiction. Who is the author? Consequences. Striking comparison. Life on earth in the body is like being in a second mother body. Like the body needs to mature in this world, so here also the spirit is to mature. This gift, the revelation of the being of the earth, is, though presumably natural, spiritual. Basic law in the first mother. Must. In the second, shall. Heavenly Father's end notes. Deo gratias. Table of contents. Hay and straw for the world scholars and critics. Material to ruminate on. The description of the people is given from the spiritual point of view and according to the inner truth, not according to the outer appearance. Justification, reason and purpose of these proclamations. Discussion of the apparent contradiction. Who is the real author? Consequences, a striking comparison. Purpose of life on earth in the material body. Spirituality of this revelation of the essence of the earth. Basic law in the first mother body. Must. In the second, shall. Heavenly Fatherly final winks. What has been said so far about the peoples of other religions has not so much been added for your sake, as for the sake of the world's spiritual representation of the earth. Namely, as the prediscussed hay and straw for the worldly learned grey-coloured mankind. As hay and straw, because it is not really part of the discourse of the spiritual earth, since it touches mostly the mere material condition of the non-Christian peoples, where, at the end, the spiritual fate of such peoples are always touched and shown. The scholars of the world will find a chief cause there. But it is precisely for this very reason that they have something to chew on. Furthermore, this edition of the non-Christian peoples is also more or less hay and straw, because the scholars who know the earth from the books know here and there some relations as differently presented than they are indicated here according to the inner truth. Of course, the scholars do not consider that the other books from which they got to know the earth were not always written by people who had travelled the earth on all points themselves. Such books were mostly written by people who firstly had enough time to write, besides the time also had the opportunity to get their hands on all the lexicons and other travelled descriptions, in order to fabricate their so-called complete geographies. The chief statisticians, to whom the whole earth is, as you say, familiar, often know the entire conditions of the country they inhabit, only in the smallest part. Instead of going on expeditions to convince themselves of everything, they prefer to rummage around in thickly dusted archives and study out of them the conditions of the country and its nature. But they should only cross a country from village to village, from community to community, from valley to valley, and from mountain to mountain. And they will find there such a quantity of new relations, customs, and habits, and such a great quantity of new names, of which they had no idea until now. But if the land in which they live has so many things to show them that they do not know, how much more will the whole surface of the earth contain various conditions, relationships, and a lot of all kinds of secrets, of which our more than omniscient scholars have never dreamed of? And therefore the world will allow me to have spoken here also of some strange earthly conditions and circumstances, because I have known the earth certainly, already very many years ago, better than the scholars will ever know it. This communication on foreign peoples is true, yet as already said, hay and straw. But it is not so with the one who is awakened in the Spirit. For these will easily convince themselves, in themselves, that it is so with the objects given, and cannot be otherwise, because this revelation is a true one, from the inside out, but not a false one, taken from the external darkness to the inner night of the heart. What can be of benefit to man when he has filled his memory with pure geographical books, but cannot, however, ask anyone, and least of all, his own spirit, whether these things are in reality as they are printed? how much better is the man who learns it from the Spirit, and is drawn by me, the Father himself. For, in the case of such a person, all science is alive, whereas in the other, it consists only of dead fragments, for whose authenticity no other guarantee remains in the end than the authority of a library and an archive. But I have given you these strange situations, not to burden the memory, but to revive the spirit. But since they were given like this, for your spirit to receive an exercise in wisdom, they are given as they are, and as they are not. As they are, the spirit finds in its light, and it becomes clear to him that these materially appearing representations are, at the bottom of it all, only spiritual. Because all these relations are on the spiritual earth, which have nothing material, for I am, who gives this a spirit, and indeed the most high spirit. There is no matter before my eyes. So every gift from me is spiritual and not material, even if it seems so material. Whether I say it already or not, I only open my mouth in parables, so that the world may be offended by them, and with open ears not hear the spoken word, and with open eyes see nothing. And the wisdom of the world may grind itself and sharpen its sting as it will. It will nevertheless never pierce the bark around the actual tree of living knowledge. It is true that I know the earth in every single atom, and the more easily the individual superficial relations and conditions. But I am not an earthly statistician, but my statistics, provided the earthly sight is correct, is only statistics of the spirit. Or would you not call him a fool who would want to teach a child in the womb by some magnetic devices, in which conditions it is in the small mother world, and how this is constituted? The child is certainly not for this purpose in the womb, but the purpose is the individual formation of life. When the child is first born, and after a few years attains the conceptual capacity, it is only by degrees that it is time to teach him more and more developed concepts. Insofar as the child has to feed himself in the mother's body, sufficient strength is given to him. Higher requirements are not needed in the mother's body. And so it is with the man in this world, which is nothing but a second great mother's body, in which his spirit must be reborn and matured. It is, therefore, necessary for him to be given only that diet, and only as much of as is necessary for his maturity. If one were to do more to him, one would only harm him and never benefit him. For the actual school of instruction only begins whenever the spirit has already been reborn and became completely free. But every spirit there will grasp the true statistics of the earth and the whole universe with great ease. Therefore it would be exceedingly foolish if one would want to burden him, the Spirit, here with silly burdens, which he still does not possess the abilities to carry here, which everyone can easily see from the circumstances that there is certainly no man on earth who would have understood the surface of the earth only by learning from the books, as completely exactly as a sheet of paper which lies rolled up before his eyes. How great would the book be, in which every detail on the surface of the earth would be described in the smallest details? And how much time would man need to read at least 1 trillion names and numbers, and then learn them by heart? Would it not be the greatest folly of me if I would be a professor of statistics for your spirit, and here, in its second mother's body, wants to teach it through material magnetism, which the spirit in his free state could easily come to grasp and understand in a minute? Therefore is everything I give spiritual, and no earthly statistic. If, however, earthly statistical points are also touched in their correct proportions, then you should, however, only regard them as like the pillar feet of a great building, which do not make up the building itself, but nevertheless the whole great glorious building rests on them. And so I do not give anything earthly in an earthly fashion, but if I give it for the sake of spiritual understanding. He who uses everything of the earth this way shall therefore enjoy the nourishment offered for his spirit. But he who enjoys it differently enjoys his own judgment, for he kills in himself what he should have revived. There is a difference between the first and the second mother's womb. In the first, man is born by must, and in the second, by ought. In the first, man is still an animal, that is, in the first judgment. In the second, he only gradually becomes a human through knowledge and through the freedom of his will, which is a judge in him. Therefore, everyone will live according to his own judgment, and he will never have any other judgment than his own. In this sense, you should also take this work and use it as a life-giving exercise for your spirit, and you will reap the right fruit. This is the true love for me, as for your brothers. You will reach this right love all the more easily when you will recognize me all the more deeply through the revealed miracles of my love, and realize how exceedingly humble and fully condescending I must be of heart to reveal such things to you for your greatest benefit, which is the ever deeper knowledge of my kingdom, in which everything else is also present as a bonus of my love. Heed these words well, and deeply consider who he is who gives them to you. If you will do this in everything and everyone, then my blessing will be bestowed upon you with this as with every other in all fullness here and hereafter, forever. Amen. Deo gratias.